In today's video, we're going to be diving into the upcoming pattern, taking a look at very severe cold air and also numerous major East Coast snowstorms. It should come as no surprise if you watch our videos daily that the models kind of did away with the snowstorms yesterday and they're back today. I told you guys it's going to be a roller coaster and that we'd see huge deviations, but the important fact is that there is multiple storm signals. And although we're going to see some movement in there, we know that the chance stays. It remains. Even if we're seeing it one day gone on the models, back the next, the threat is there. That's the overlying factor, is that there is a storm moving up, there is cold air, and even if the models want to flip-flop, we're going to get to the bottom of it here soon as we're drawing closer and closer each day. Let's take a look quickly at the 6 to 10 day temperature outlook. This is going to give us a good idea of what to expect over the next few days and few weeks here. So this is the 19th through the 23rd. And this is actually going to be right around when we have a potential southeast snowstorm. And this is one that we've seen the model show go offshore or stay closer. That would put these areas at risk for a pretty major snowstorm. Now, there still is a chance that this cold is a little overdone, and we do see it try to run a lot closer to the coast and further up the coast. This would put the Northeast and Mid-Atlantic on notice, but the further south you go, really the higher the chances with this type of a situation. And I have seen snowstorms like this in the past, especially if we're talking, upstate South Carolina, areas of central North Carolina, central and eastern Virginia, into the kind of lower Mid-Atlantic area. This is a pretty classic storm track, and although it's not the most common one in the world, we do see it every couple of years. So I don't want everybody to be like, oh, this is crazy stuff. We do see this happen. Not to guarantee that it's going to happen in this case. I never want to allude to that when we're talking about the medium or long range, because there is no guarantees about the medium or long range, especially long range. But this is something that is a semi common storm track and definitely has potential. Now, as we move on to the precipitation, we see it kind of reflects this, the chance for storms moving along kind of the immediate east, and we do see these areas seeing the chance for above average precipitation during this time frame. Kind of the Climate Prediction Center's way of indicating that, hey, very cold, we do see a chance for a storm moving up the coast. That's exactly what this screams. Now, it's not, because it's all based on percentages, it's not at the 50 or 60 or 70% chance. We're talking, 33 to 40, 40 to 50% chance of being above average. So they're keeping 1 foot in, 1 foot out, but that's how it's always going to be when we're talking, a week out or even 10 days out. Very dry for the West. That's going to still remain to be the theme for a while here. The 8 to 14 day outlook, while colder for the East, could spell a little bit of a lesser chance for snowfall. As this cold moves over the immediate eastern states, if we were to draw a hypothetical jet stream, you're probably looking at something that is well offshore for the heart of the cold to be out here. So the main storm track would eventually track way further out to sea. In other words, too cold for snow. Now, the thing is that if this cold is overdone by the models, or perhaps further east than it's going to be, then we could see that chance for snowfall kind of start to trend back in. But this is going to be a harder pattern to find it in from the 21st through the 27th. For coastal storms, at least, we're likely to have a few storms moving through the cold, like Clipper systems, that could bring some light to moderate amounts of snowfall for some areas. But for the coastal big-time nor'easters, this is a little overdone as far as the temperatures for that potential. And when we look at the 8 to 14 day outlook, it reflects that we have neutral to below average precipitation for these mid-Atlantic and northeast areas. And really, you're going to kind of go back into a pattern where probably the best chance for snowfall is going to be in this more suppressed, more southern slider type area. That kind of reflects what the temperature pattern would show. Now, as we take a look at the past 14 days now, the first 14 days of January, it has been really cold, especially for the central states, and then especially from the Ohio Valley and Mid-Atlantic southward here in the east. A little closer to neutral for the Great Lakes and Northeast, although their averages are much lower, so it's probably been very cold up there as well with average temperatures. And these more Mid-Atlantic and Southeast areas have been equally, if not a little less cold, as far as actual temperatures go, but compared to their averages, it's been far below. Also, the west has been a lot warmer. We call this a positive PNA, and really this aids in the cold a lot because it forces the cold from the Arctic up in Canada to force to the east of it, and that's a lot of why we've seen this colder air diving into the eastern and central states over the last 2 weeks now. As we move on to the European model, both models are going to show our more southeast type snowstorm, that first kind of 20th through 22nd snowstorm threat. We do have other ones on these models, but they're going to be a little bit less in agreement. Now, as we just kind of take a look, it's cold. There's snow showers. I've seen even in Virginia, my neck of the woods, there's a chance for snow showers tonight. That's how cold it is, and some bay effect snowfall is what we call it down here, but also just snow showers moving through this very cold area is going to be a possibility. But really, when we're looking outside of that, nothing major to discuss outside of the cold air here for the day today on Tuesday the 14th. As we move towards Wednesday the 15th, a lot of the same. Snow showers. We do have a little bit of activity kind of getting going here for the western Gulf of Mexico, where most of our storms are going to originate from. But nothing over the United States that is too concerning as of tomorrow either on the Wednesday the 15th. When we look at Thursday the 16th, you've guessed it, kind of the same thing, a little bit more prevalent here with these snow showers across the Great Lakes, Ohio Valley area, but no major storms. The jet stream is really warm out west and colder in the east here, much colder. Then we move towards Friday, and this is the 17th. We've been talking about this for a few days, but this is the beginning of our warm little push that we're going to get for maybe 24 to 48 hours. Here in the east, it starts with the Midwest, and it's starting to intrude here on the southeast as well. A little bit of a colder push through the west, even bringing a little bit of snowfall here for the northern Rockies and northern plains. But probably the biggest factor on screen here is one that you're probably overlooking a little bit, and it's this low between the Hudson Bay and between the Great Lakes. And this has been something that has ushered in our major cooldowns this year. So expect to see this low feature a cold front and pull the cold air down into the eastern states. You can see this probably as a warm front out ahead of it as well, which is aiding in the warm air kind of just swinging up. So that low has a lot to do with our overall temperature look and precipitation look here. That's the most prominent feature on screen by far, and it's driving this pattern. As we take a look at Saturday, we see that cold front developing and really taking over. We do see snowfall on the kind of northern half of that cold front for areas of the Ohio Valley, Mid-Atlantic, Northeast, Great Lakes, especially there in Canada, areas like Toronto and surrounding regions seeing some moderate snowfall from this. 992 up here, definitely the primary low, but we do have a secondary low overhead here, bringing some heavier precipitation down below as well. Thunderstorms, potential severe weather, and definitely showers will be pretty prevalent also for the day on Saturday here. For the Gulf states, for the southeast states, that's going to be basically what we're seeing going. By Sunday, we're finally getting the cold moving in. We do see a coastal low wanting to get going off the mid-Atlantic, and this would be a snowstorm threat, and it's a signal we're kind of watching. Oftentimes along these cold fronts, which we can see still on screen here, we get lows forming, somewhere around here after it kind of gets cut off from your primary low, which is way up in Canada right now. And that is going to present itself as kind of our first snowstorm threat here for the mid-Atlantic and Northeast. The cold is just moving in, so it's not brutally cold. This is kind of a quick little opportunity between the warmth and cold where we do get a snowfall threat here that I'm watching closely. We do see that kind of move up the coast, bringing the mid-Atlantic and Northeast some moderate, maybe even heavy snowfall right before this really deep cold air gets going. Immediately, as we're looking at kind of Monday into Tuesday, that's the 20th into the 21st, we see a low forming here, you guessed it, over the western Gulf of Mexico. Some cold air and also with it kind of some activity moving down. We'll call this piece of energy number 2. Number 1 is going to be this low down here in the Gulf. And what we see happening is they're kind of coming together. They're phasing, and your jet stream is rip-roaring through the southeast here. So that would have the perfect opportunity to get pulled through. We're right at about days 5/6 right here. And as we take a look at the afternoon, it gets going with some Texas, Louisiana, Arkansas, Mississippi snowfall, some ice perhaps closer to the Gulf Coast. This is deep cold that we're talking about. And 2 days ago, I mentioned this. I mean, this is severe cold. And if there's an opportunity for very far deep south snowfall, it is in a pattern like this, a very rare pattern with this deep Arctic air reaching down into the Gulf states. So it's not as far fetched as you might think, even though it is quite rare. The reason isn't because storms don't move through there. The reason is because the cold air doesn't get this deep. The cold air is what's rare. The storm just happens to match up with the cold. So that's not a really good reason to feel like this isn't possible or wouldn't happen. I hate that word because nothing's impossible in weather. It's part of why I love it so much. Nothing is impossible, and situations like this are what makes it so interesting. You never know. And as we take a look, I want to move this forward towards Wednesday. What we see is that this storm starts to kind of swing around and move up. We get a little bit more of a warm push on this particular model run compared to the GFS. We have snowfall back for the Gulf states, snowfall up in North Carolina and Virginia. A little bit reminiscent, perhaps, of our previous snowstorm that we just had. I say a little bit because it's kind of like loosely similar. We see a lot of ice for Georgia, South Carolina, and North Carolina, which would be a similarity there for sure, and this warm push up the coast. If you wanted to see snowfall in these areas that are seeing ice and rain primarily, you would need the storm to kind of swing around further offshore here, allowing for the cold to fully engulf into this area. That's what would need to take place. As we keep going towards kind of the nighttime, this is 7 p.m. on Wednesday. Heavy snowfall throughout the Appalachian Mountain Range, even extending up into like the DC, kind of lower mid-Atlantic area. And this low gets very strong here, 998, very decent. Northern Virginia, West Virginia, Maryland, DC, Pennsylvania, New Jersey here seeing heavy snowfall, likely a plowable snowfall event on this model run within 10 days. It's not super far out. It continues to intensify as we move through the night. This is 7 a.m. the next morning, 993 offshore of southern New England, the mid-Atlantic. And we see still kind of like the lower mid-Atlantic up through into southern New England seeing heavy snowfall from this one before it moves offshore. Again, we're going to cross-examine this with the GFS in a moment, which is a little bit more snowy for that southeast corridor. If you guys are wanting that to occur, stay tuned. We have some model guidance still suggesting that. Both models had the storm 2 days ago. Both models didn't really have it yesterday for the most part. The GFS did, but it was way further southeast. And now they both have it again, so we're flip-flopping. It's a roller coaster, right? And that's why I try to tell you guys so much. It's really bad when people just look at the title and thumbnail and don't get the actual information because they don't hear me say this, but this is going to be a roller coaster. There is no way to know if this storm is going to be a massive snowstorm or if it's going to be too far offshore or if it's going to move inland and we're going to see more inland areas see snowfall. There is no way to know at the 7 to 10 range. The 7 to 10 day range, that is. But why we do this and what the important information is that there is a storm signal that we're going to be tracking for the possibility of snowfall. So if you're looking for the possible outcomes, this is what I'm giving you. And there's extremely likely going to be very cold air. Within 7 to 10 days, we have probably 90% certainty that there is going to be severe cold air. So the ingredients are there. How's it going to come together? That's what we're going to spend the next few days kind of uncovering. Expect more fluctuations, flip-flops all over the place with every model run. We're going to go over it just to kind of get the possibilities, but they are going to start to come together more and more every single day until we have a really good idea of what to expect. With our previous snowstorm, we saw it all the way back in December. It looked a lot different than it ended up looking, but the important information is that there was a storm signal. That's what we were tracking, and that ended up being correct. There was a storm. And what's interesting is that the storm signal was there for a few days, and then probably from January 1st till like the 5th, it was gone for like 5 days. And then it came back and it ended up happening. And we could see something like that. I kind of felt like that's what was going to happen yesterday as we saw it go away. Maybe it wouldn't come back for a few days, but we saw it rebound really quickly. We'll just have to see what the models do with it, but they're going to be fluctuating. Be warned. We do see another area of activity here in the Western Gulf, number 3, I would say, that we've seen so far by day 10. So within the next 10 days, 3 potential storms starting out in this Western Gulf of Mexico area. We can see that this doesn't have as much jet to work with. We have kind of a zonal flow here, which means the jet stream is just moving straight from west to east. Not a whole bunch of pull until you move further south. There is a little bit that could help it pull up the coast. Let's see what ends up playing out here. It does kind of pull up, but it doesn't meet with the cold air. So we just get some rainfall across the southeast with that one. And then we get an interior look as we kind of stay with this flat jet stream. We get a storm going here, and it's going to want to pull kind of through into the Midwest areas. And this is going to pull in the cold air behind it and kind of rise up the warmth out ahead of it. So watch this all kind of play out here as it moves through. Very interesting stuff. We see it start to just elevate that jet stream and pull in the cold air. We do get some snowfall for the Midwest, Great Lakes, Northeast there. And that one moves out and it kind of brings back the cold for the most part. But as we're looking at the end of this model run, very close to the end of January, it does start to pull in some more low pressure along the west. Beyond days 10 is when we start to see massive, massive fluctuations. So, obviously the models have flirted with a pattern change at the end of their model runs for weeks now, and it hasn't happened yet. So that might still happen in this case, where this is just kind of not going to happen, or eventually, because we can't stay in this pattern forever, they're going to be right. So it's really hard to determine, is this the one that's right, or is this just going to be another pattern change that's wrong? And it's, again, another thing that's impossible to know, and that's why I feel it's important to show it, because I want people to be prepared for what's possible. Obviously, tomorrow we'll know more about the 29th than we do today, and so on and so forth. So we're going to uncover it together daily. Let's take a look here, because that is the end of the model run at the GFS. And again, our storm, specifically the 20th, 21st one, is going to look a little different. As we take a look at Wednesday, we get the cold and snow showers, no real activity to discuss until we're moving towards about Saturday, where we end up with a very similar look. Strong low up in Canada, moved between the Hudson Bay and Great Lakes, moved up into Canada. We start to get a secondary low down here with snowfall. I mean, this is almost identical. Thunderstorms and showers across the southeast and Gulf states. It's wonderful when you see this type of agreement. And then the severe cold air moves in really rapidly. Quickly, we see that low form, and it looks very similar to this point as well, with ice and snow across the deep south for the 21st, Tuesday. Very early, by the way, on Tuesday. We're looking at 1 a.m. on Tuesday, January 21st, and that is Eastern time as well. So this might be the later hours of Monday for the more central time area. So sometime between the 20th and 21st, in other words. We're seeing this get going. Let's see what the differences are, because we start to see that snow stretch towards the Carolinas. A lot of ice on the southern end in this instance as well. But whereas the European model had the low over the Carolinas, we see it offshore of the Carolinas here, and that's going to make a big difference, because we get a more solidified snow corridor here for the southern Appalachians into more North Carolina, Virginia area. The only difference is this one is going to move almost directly offshore and bring snowfall to those more south areas, and it's not going to pull up into the mid-Atlantic and Northeast like the European models show. So pretty big differences there with that. But for, 7 to 10 days out, when you have the models both agreeing on the beginning of a storm, kind of within 50 miles of where it ends up just a day later, that's a solid storm signal to work with. Now, we might see them flip-flop more. This might just be kind of a coincidence that we're seeing this kind of agreement. It was the other day because, well, I guess they stayed in agreement. They agreed that it would happen, and then they agreed that it wouldn't, and now they're agreeing that it will again. So kind of they're in sync, but it's a very up and down, all over the place in sync. But it's interesting that they're kind of flip-flopping the same way right now. I wouldn't be surprised if, like, tomorrow, by the way, every time I say this, it comes true. Probably going to be wrong eventually, but wouldn't be surprised if, like, the GFS model shows it tomorrow and then the European model doesn't, or vice versa. But also, maybe we'll just see continued agreement. That's definitely what I'm hoping for, because I want the models to get a clear idea here. But wouldn't be surprised to start to see some disagreement at some point. We still have days to go. But once we move towards, the 16th, 17th, 18th, we should have a much more solid idea and should see agreement on something pretty close to the outcome. So we'll be waiting for that. Very cold air between the 23rd, 24th, 25th here. We do get a snowstorm for the north. It's just further north in this instance. The northern Great Lakes into the northeast do get snowfall like the European model showed, but it's just further north with it. And then on this model, a key difference is by the 29th, what we see is warmth in the west, cold in the east, so a huge disagreement, pretty much the opposite of what the European model showed by the 29th. And we have another western Gulf of Mexico kind of storm to watch here. As we go through the end of the model run, it looks like we're sitting with potential, because this has basically just moved right here. Oftentimes they weaken a little bit before they kind of take off the East Coast. We are getting a little bit of wintry weather there across the Georgia and South Carolina area. Again, when you're looking at 15 days out, it's going to change a big time. I mean, when we're looking at 12, 13, 14, 15 days out, there's a good chance that the storm signal won't even be there anymore. I think the bigger picture beyond 10 days out, for the most part, is that this storm just shows continued cold and storm chances. So don't pay too much attention to the specifics at this point. It's more about the overall fact of the overall pattern that we're seeing on the models, where you can kind of get an idea of what might be happening. So with that being said, let's start to get into some of the more specifics for the short to medium range. And the precipitation, it's clear the Gulf of Mexico is controlling everything right now. We just see these storms continuously kind of moving up or through or around the southeast area, and we end up with above average precipitation down here, but pretty much below average for everywhere else, unless you're in like the northern plains and Rocky Mountains for the most part, or by the Great Lakes here. So let's see the anomalies, and sure enough, above average for this active storm track through here, above average a little bit there for the Rockies, and almost everywhere else below average. When we look at the total snowfall, we're going to see obviously a pretty massive difference, because the European model is a lot more interior with this snowfall until it reaches the mid-Atlantic and northeast, of course. But the GFS model is going to be a lot more coastal and southeast. But nevertheless, both models do have massive snowstorms. We see a lot for the Rockies, definitely an increased amount for the Sierra Nevada and as well as the Northwest. Overall, a pretty snowy look for most everywhere. The biggest snow hole is kind of this area here, unfortunately. But very healthy looking snow map here for the next 15 days, as it should be with the temperatures we have. I mean, it was shocking how little amount of snow we saw with the cold. I mean, how brutal is it? Not to kind of put salt in the wound, but think about this for a second. We've had all these warm winters in a row. Obviously, we didn't see a lot of snowfall because of that, but then it's like finally it's like, wow, we're having such a cold winter, and it has been just so cold, and then it's like dry. It's almost too cold. So that's pretty brutal. It's kind of a slap in the face a little bit. I think we can turn things around here, and it does look very possible here coming up soon. But that is pretty brutal, to say the least. That the warm is the reason we weren't seeing snow for years, and now it's like the cold is the reason we're not seeing snow. So one of these days we're gonna hit on something though, for sure. When we look at the zoomed in look, we can see a lot of these totals would be over 10 inches in this instance with this type of a scenario, like the European model is suggesting. The storm kind of tracks right underneath the snow line here. So for the most part, we see a track something like that. This would be a mid-Atlantic special for sure. Southern New England cashes in on quite a bit though, and the Appalachian Mountain Range gets quite a decent amount as well. Also the deep south, like Texas, Louisiana, Mississippi, southern Arkansas into Tennessee, even northern Alabama again, northern Georgia. These areas would see one of their snowiest winters almost ever if we got another storm down there. So the trend is your friend though. If we've been seeing this, maybe we'll continue to see it. GFS model, again, pretty different, but both have a snowstorm. A lot flatter with the trajectory of it though. And we get high amounts for Texas into Louisiana. We get really high amounts for the Carolinas into Virginia as well, but it doesn't track northward. So we end up with the kind of classic snow hole here over the kind of coastal areas of the Mid-Atlantic and Northeast. That's been ongoing, and this model says it's going to continue. The other one says it is not. So we will see. I hope that you guys get snowfall, because I've been hearing your comments and I feel your pain. I mean, I've been snowless for a long time too, so I get it. I understand how y'all are feeling, and I'm hoping that we see some trends in a positive direction. But unfortunately, like I just said a minute ago, the trend is your friend, and maybe that means that this is going to kind of continue a little bit. Hopefully not though. It's not that way every time. Let's take a look at the east here, zoomed in. And again, I think a common similarity here is that both models do have 10-inch plus snowstorms. So maybe a foot. I'm sure what would end up accumulating is much closer to like 8 to 10 inches in these areas where it shows 12 to 14. So maybe a bullseye, something like that on this instance. But again, it could be like this for the next run with the bullseye, and then it could be like this the one after, and then, you know, again here tomorrow, and then maybe a little further north. It's just going to bounce around until we get to some sort of agreement. So don't pay too much attention to where we're seeing snowfall. Just know that there is a really good chance that somewhere in here ends up with a large amount of snowfall. And it's hard because I see people in the comments like, so anything can happen, and it's not really that broad, obviously. On the days like let's say, I'm trying to think of a good date time frame, like the 23rd, 24th, 25th, we know that there's not a chance like this, like there is on the 20th, 21st, 22nd. So we do have some sort of idea of the timing, and we do have some sort of idea of the pattern, which gives us an idea of the track. But it's hard to be perfect, and you know, obviously within 1, 2, 3, 4 days you can get a really good idea. But when we're trying to forecast the 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 days, that's when you have to kind of give some grace, because if we can come up with ideas, I think that's miraculous enough, um, for the current state of the technology, which we just use the models. We're just going over the models, and I'm gonna go on a quick tangent real quick. A comment that bothers me a little bit is one that I see a lot, where it's like, you need to change your models. You need to get new models. They're wrong. I I would, trust me. If there was a better model out there, I would get it. But this is the European model and the GFS model, the same model that you see on the Weather Channel, your local channel, the NWS uses. If there was a better model, somebody'd be using it, but we're all using the same one. So it's not my model, it's everybody's models, and they are the two most accurate global models that there is in the world right now. So that is what it is. That's what we have to work with. Our tools available to us, and I think that we're going to see big development over the coming years. But it is what it is. Everybody's working with the same stuff. So just a little bit of a disclaimer there. European models temperature pattern, very cold, obviously, for the next coming days. We do get this brief warm up for the 17th, 18th, 19th, perhaps, before we cool down in a bigger way here for the 19th, 20th, and again, 21st here is right around when this snowstorm would be occurring. And look at this. Again, this is rare cold, like I mentioned. It's not the storm that's rare. We see storms. We saw 4 storms move through here on a 10-day or 15-day model run. The storms aren't uncommon here. It's this cold that is extremely rare. So when we have a good idea that there's going to be rare cold air in place, rare things happen. Rare other effects happen, like snow and ice. So that is kind of how I feel about it. For areas further north in here, you don't need the purples to see snowfall. You only need like 10 degrees below normal or so, which would be greens. We have magenta, or what do I call it, purplish blues and magentas in this area. Certainly cold enough for snow between the 20th, 21st, and 22nd. It's just, will the storm be too far offshore? Or will it pull up perfectly? Or will it be over land? And what would happen is it would eat away at some of this cold in here. Only time will tell. What we see afterwards is cold, cold, cold. And then we start to get some warming trends. But I mean, even by the end of the model run, I mean, we have cold in here. We still have cold in here, though. It's kind of a mixed bag look. When we look at the GFS model here, I mean, we get the same thing. Cold, cold, cold. Little warm up, and then even more brutal cold. Pretty similar in intensity as well. I mean, look at the cold down by the Gulf states. So very similar. Very rare cold. And as we keep moving on, we see the cold kind of continue a lot longer on this model through the 26th. We get a brief warm up, and then it kind of just recycles, and we continue to see that cold all the way through the 30th. So still, I've said this for 2 weeks now. No end in sight. When there is, we'll know. But right now, there is no clear end in sight to this. Absolutely crazy stuff. Anyway, be sure to subscribe. We upload every single day, and we will be doing that. We'll be talking about these storms. We'll be getting the information together and kind of pinpointing it. It's fun. It's a lot of fun. I love doing it with you guys, and I hope that there's those of you out there that just enjoy kind of going over it and figuring it out together. It's like I have friends to talk about the weather with, is what it always feels like. So it's really cool. And we're going to be going over all of these things over the coming days, so be sure to subscribe. You can even hit the bell icon for daily notifications when we upload, so you never miss one. Be sure to like the video if you did enjoy it. Leave a comment down below, and I'll see you guys in the next video.